Chapter 461 Opinion by Heidesgrain. Merle Arths, the middle-aged man felt as if he was missing out on something important. This made him think about what had happened for a few seconds before he cleared his throat. Everyone quieted down at that moment, intently listening. It is only obvious that we should exchange the body refinement manuals with something valuable. But I think this discussion should be held with the person who translated the neutral body refinement manual, right? Jason almost flinched and he could barely contain himself as he noticed that Merle's eyes brushed past him. A glint of interest could be seen within them and Jason understood that his hand sign had been too obvious. Nevertheless, the middle-aged man didn't point him out, which caused Jason to sigh inwardly. He was relieved, and it was Fasro who had to act accordingly. I don't think that the person who translated the body refinement manual will have a problem meeting you. At least if nobody else is present. This person wants to remain anonymous after all. When he heard this, Merle just nodded his head knowingly. The Arior has no idea what the youth wants, but at least he protects him. Not bad. But why is he doing that? There should be a proper reason for the representative of the Arior race to act like that, and Merle had just noticed that he was staring at Fasro for a few seconds. Shaking his head, he said, "All right, just tell me when and I'll tell you where." After that, Merle Arths returned the attention back to the main topic that was about distributing their army's force. Unfortunately, there were more problems than initially expected. In the beginning, everything worked perfectly fine, only to become chaotic once the talk about the common foreign races that were suppressed began. Nobody wanted to face them, and those big clans and ancient sects that were assigned to fight them were visibly enraged. "Do you want to eradicate us? Is your final plan to kill all of us? How should even a single member of my clan survive with this suicidal plan? Mr. Arths, I think this plan is too biased and does not include what happens once the war is over. Everything should return to the good old system. From the looks of it, most of the big clans that have to face other suppressed and weakened big clans have connections with you. This could be meaningless, but from what I can perceive, the aftermath of the Great Argos War will eradicate many of those big clans and sects you've labeled a nuisance for a long time. For example, how should two clans, with one of them being my clan, be able to take care of the Ephrata race? We've been weakened and there are more than 250,000 Ephrata and Efri which my clan would have to face. Don't tell me that you think my clan will be strong enough to face them just because we have a water and earth affinity." Before, Jason had not been interested in the whole conversation about the distribution of the Argos Alliance's army. That was at least until a middle-aged woman with shoulder-long blue hair began to voice out her complaints about the fact that her clan would have to face the Ephrata race. This caused his interest to be pricked and Jason began to listen carefully. Shane noticed this and sighed deeply, but he held himself back from saying anything. Meanwhile, Merle Arths, who had expected to be blamed for setting up a plan that seemed to be biased even though it wasn't, remained silent. He was just staring into the middle-aged woman's eyes for a few seconds before he said, "So you want to tell me that the two biggest clans with the most advantageous affinities and soul bonds are too weak to fight against a single common race? They're having a numerical disadvantage even without counting your soul bonds. Let's leave out the obvious fact that the Ephrata race and the Ivris fire affinity should be much weaker against you, your soul bonds, and the entire clan you represent. Let's also ignore the existence of your strongest soul bond and a few other soul bonds your clan members have, all right? Otherwise, you might think I'm trying to blackmail you." Jason had to smile when he heard how the middle-aged man played around with the matriarch of a big clan. He was unsure what clan she belonged to, but from what Jason had heard, it should be one of the stronger ones. Does she want to avoid responsibility, or maybe that her clans could suffer more casualties by fighting against the Ephrata race? It was unknown whether Jason's assumption was correct or if there was another reason, but it was evident that the middle-aged woman's clan was trying to avoid facing the Ephrata clan. Jason understood this partially, at least if he were to think rationally. However, his mind was already infested with the thought of taking revenge on Scorpio's death. As such, he didn't even notice that he had subconsciously mumbled, "If you don't dare to fight the Ephrata race, let me handle the weaker Ephratas and are free." When Jason had said so, the whole room was coincidentally silent, and it was only when Shane pushed him slightly from the side that Jason was drawn out of his train of thoughts. He looked at his master in confusion, not knowing what he had said, which Shane noticed. "You said your thoughts out loud." "Oh. Oops," Jason said without being sorry at all. He wanted to defeat the Ephrata alone, if possible, but Jason was fully aware of his own capabilities and limitations. Even those enemies at the mid-lick stage were already too much for him to handle, and there was no way he could obliterate an entire army with such enemies. Jason might have received a large increment in his combat prowess thanks to the 2 weapons he had received. However, his words had sounded more like an insult to those 2 clans he had wanted to offer his help to. The vast majority of the Ephrata race was at the licky stage below 1,000 drops of liquefied mana, and Jason wanted to take care of all of them, alone at that. Was he overestimating his own capabilities or simply trying to make fun of the 2 big clans that had been told to defeat the Ephrata race alone? If Jason was strong enough to accomplish this feat, what would become of the 2 big clans' reputation? The middle-aged woman had been complaining about the fact that her clan was set up against the Ephrata race, and she knew that her clan was not strong enough to fight against the Ephrata, whether it was alone or with another big clan. In the end, the Ephrata's fire ability was weird and much stronger than Merlarth's had made it. Furthermore, every race, even the weakest, had a refined physique which made them stronger than humans at the same rank was. Almost every big clan, sect, and even smaller family had to suffer for more than a year since the Great Argos War had begun, thus their strength was drastically reduced. Despite that, it was humiliating to think that a youth that looked younger than 20 years old was confident to defeat tens of thousands of opponents while they had to cower and combine their forces with other big clans to be only remotely as confident as Jason seemed to be. However, in the end, the confidence Jason released was what caused everyone to be hesitant to question whether he was joking or seriously considering defeating an entire army. Maybe the Great Argos War caused the youth to lose his sanity. He has less than 30 drops of liquefied mana in his mana core. How should he be able to defeat peak Grandmagus ranks? It was normal to think like that, but only a young woman dared to voice out her opinion about Jason's confidence that was unfounded according to his mana core rank. Yet, instead of being annoyed by the young woman, who had said what was on her mind, Jason just smiled before he said, "If you want to find out whether I will be strong enough to fight against the Ephrata or not, why don't you act as the test object?" Chapter 462 It Won't Take Long by Hydesgrain. You will enter the Lord rank in a few months, right? This would mean that I should be much weaker than you. If I have lost my sanity and be as weak as you say, let's figure out the truth after the grand meeting. Jason hadn't said much during the grand meeting yet, and it was only now that he attracted the other big clan and ancient sect leaders' attention. Others would rather hold back and refrain from being too arrogant in front of the powerhouses that were present. But that was not all, because the opponents they had to face multiple foreign intelligent races but also several big clans. As such, the atmosphere had already been tensed up and nobody wanted to take any risks. This was exactly why Jason's confidence caused everyone to be a little bit astonished as Merlarth said, "Take care of your matters after the grand meeting and don't interrupt it. If your words are true and you are strong enough to defeat the Ephrata at the Magus and Grandmagus rank, there would still be a small issue for you. You are only one person and there are tens of thousands of Ephratas you would face at once. Can you reassure everyone that not a single one of them would escape your grasp, destroying the entire plan I made up?" That's probably not the case, thus I marked the Ephrata race as the NUA and Era clan's target. If you have something against my decision, give me a proper reason, or wait until the grand meeting has ended before you propose a proper plan to the NUA and Era clan. Jason understood what Merlarth wanted to say, but he found that the middle-aged man was a little bit too inflexible. I'm not here to drink tea and waste my time either. It's not like everyone accepted the plan. In the end, it is much better for the army heads to know about the entire plan so that everyone knows everything. Otherwise, who knows what might happen. I don't want to be in the crossfire of someone else's attack, only because I didn't know about their plans. He wanted to continue voicing out his opinion, but unfortunately, Shane prevented him from doing so by covering his mouth. Shut it, please. What you're doing right now is not really helpful. Squinting his eyes as he heard Shane's words, Jason was not sure what the hell was going on. Isn't the grand meeting supposed to learn about the clans and sects in order to figure out the best plan to fight against the Drake Alliance? Am I completely oblivious to what is going on, or does this look more like most clans have already accepted the plan without doubting its efficiency? Jason just shook his head, thinking that there was something odd about the entire grand meeting when he heard a few ancient sects voicing out their opinion too. Why are we not combining our forces and face each clan and sect on their own? This separation is rather disadvantageous because some clans have more members at the Magus and Grand Magus rank than others. At the same time, everyone's soul awakening is unique and it would be useless to send someone with a high-ranked soul bond with a water affinity to face a race with an innate thunder affinity. Even without looking at everything in a less detailed manner, I can pick out several dozen cases where descendants have awoken a strong soul with different compatible affinities than the entire clan or sect has. Do you want to sacrifice them just like that? Without asking whether the plan you set up is really as good as you make it. It was the Blood Sect Patriarch who had said this, and once he had finished his last sentence, he kept staring at Jason. This made him uncomfortable and Jason tried to divert his attention to Merlarth, only to notice that he was also looking at him. Clearing his throat, he scratched the back of his head with cold eyes piercing at Jason before he said with a loud voice. I had yet to reveal my plan completely and the information I laid out was just the foundation. Because we've been interrupted, I couldn't point out the issue you've just mentioned. After that, almost a whole day had passed and Merlarth pointed out the issue with the different suitable affinities. At the same time, the entire meeting was allowed to voice out their issues and how one could fix them. They had also created an elite unit with the most powerful humans of every big clan, while only the clan and sect heads had been excluded because they had to lead their people. Jason hadn't said anything since he had voiced out his opinion, which was mostly because Shane had told him to stay quiet. Meanwhile, the Shiabi clan patriarch had glanced at him out of the corner of his eyes, but Jason was unable to figure out why exactly he did so. What Jason found great was the fact that Merlarth didn't think that he had intentionally voiced out his opinion to offend him, which hadn't been his intention, to begin with. Rather than that, Jason had just wanted to help and bring the best result out of the plan he thought to be lacking something. Though, in the end, Jason could tell that he was too impatient and foolish. As such, he felt a little bit embarrassed, only to hear Merlarth ending the grand meeting by saying, now that we've solved most issues, let's find out whether we can change the strategy which the NUA and Era clan made to prevent as many casualties as possible. Golden Silverish Eyes Youth, are you ready to demonstrate whether or not you're insane and was as Dala NUA has said? Merlarth's eyes were glimmering in curiosity instead of anger, but Jason found this scarier than the other way around. Once he had taken a deep breath, he nodded his head before saying, right here or outside? Under normal circumstances, fighting outside would be better for him because he would be able to utilize the landscape to his advantage. However, that was not the case if he were to face the young woman called Dala NUA, who had voiced her opinion about his overconfident and insane behavior. The young woman had a water affinity at the mid-lick stage and her body had been refined with a water-based body refining technique too. As such, she was stronger than most descendants of big clans at her age, otherwise, she wouldn't be eligible to attend the grand meeting in the first place. If Jason was honest, he was not confident to defeat her, owing to her affinity advantage. Solaris was a pure flame, and there was no need to determine whether a fire or water affinity at the same rank was stronger. However, what allowed Jason to calm down was the fact that Solaris had multiple abilities while its strength was also higher than Darla Nua's water affinity. As such, Jason was able to stand up calmly when Mer'Arth said, "Let's go outside. Afterward, you can speak with the NUA and Era clan heads to figure out a plan before telling us everything at the next and hopefully last meeting." There was a hidden meaning behind Merle's words, and almost everyone was able to decipher them. He thinks that the youth with gold and silverish eyes will defeat Darla despite the gap of more than 900 drops of liquefied mana. Chapter 463 Might of Guns by Hydesgrain. When Darla Nua and the Nua clan matriarch heard what Mer'Arth said, they were immediately enraged and frustrated. Darla wanted to voice out her anger, but the matriarch was able to refrain her from doing so. Calm down and demonstrate to them that this youth is nothing but an ant. Defeat him in an overwhelming manner and everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Jason didn't really bother about the middle-aged man's words. Instead, he had already summoned his 2 desert eagles, Kumo and Diga, before he holstered them quickly. Darla, who was already annoyed and glaring at the Mer'Arths, didn't notice that something about Jason's appearance had changed. Nevertheless, there were many clan heads that saw his weapons and the mana currents, the material they had been made, released. This astonished them a little bit, increasing their interest. However, it was only when they noticed that the weapon's mana storage had already been filled, that everyone began to realize why Jason was confident to be strong enough to defeat Ifritas at the low lick stage. Even though he might be able to kill 1 or 2 Grandmagus ranks with the amount of mana stored within both weapons, that's already everything. Nobody knew Kumo and Diga's real worth, except Jason and Mike, who was still working relentlessly to manufacture more ammo. This caused Jason to think that he shouldn't waste too many bullets while fighting against Darla. 6 of the common bullets for Kumo and 1 from Diga should be more than enough. If that's not the case, even hundreds of bullets wouldn't make me look better. Now that he had made his decision, Jason and the others were already outside the gigantic hall in which the grand meeting had been held. Shane and Dahlia were walking next to him, but instead of lecturing him, both thought that Jason was old enough to know whether he did something wrong or not. For others, Jason might look like he had reached the age of 20 for some clan heads, but almost nobody knew that he was in fact not even 17 years old. Nevertheless, his masters were in the opinion that Jason was much better off being independent than relying on either of them. He was more mature and scheming than they were either way. This was something Jason seemed to have learned even without his master's help, and somehow it was both reassuring because he could pay attention to himself, but also sad because of the same reason. Mer'Arths, who walked in front of everyone, halted his steps when they had reached an open area without any camps obstructing the fight. In the next 3 minutes you guys can prepare yourself. After that, distance yourself 200 meters. Then I'll start a countdown. Nobody should be killed, or heavily injured, understood? Jason just nodded his head before he walked towards the open field that was in fact the arena Merle had chosen. It might look like he was too full of himself because he wasn't preparing anything, but Jason could only sigh inwardly. Since the incident of the Yazlawn caves, he had yet to procure an armor. The only protection device he had was the Mana Sphere bracelet that was filled with Shane and Dahlia's mana. He should have purchased a simple armor, but Jason had noticed that not even grade 3 armors were something to his liking and a waste of money. They were at most comparable to other protection devices at the late, or if manufactured perfectly, peak lick stage. Yet, despite being powerful enough to protect him from most attacks, Jason felt like common armors were not something he needed. Mana and soul equipment was what he wanted, at a high grade at best, but he had yet to find anything suitable. Jason might as well forge one for himself, or hire someone to customize him a mana grade 3 leather armor, but he had been unable to find someone like this within the Shiabi clan alliance until now. Now that he was in the middle of more than a dozen clans and sects, Jason was confident to find the best person to manufacture the desired armor he was looking for. Nevertheless, Darla and most clan heads looked at Jason with disdain, thinking that he was overestimating his capabilities, and there were only Shane and Dahlia who sighed deeply. At that moment, Merle Arths appeared next to them as he asked, "Does your disciple not have our armor?" Shane was astonished to see Merle Arths appearing next to him, but the next question caused him to stiffen. "I doubt that you taught this youth." Jason was his name, I think, how to read the universal language of the foreign races, and neither their hand signs, right? Jason had already explained what kind of excuse he wanted to use if someone were to ask Shane whether he had taught Jason the universal language or not, but there was never something about sign language. Clearing his throat, Shane just said. Shane taught himself both the written language of the foreign races and the hand signs. He read multiple partially translated blessed martial art techniques and learned reading the universal language. As for the hand signs, that's something he started to learn only recently. The Arior race is fond of Jason and handed him a book with hand signs and to learn how to speak the universal language too. Shane thought that his answer was okay. It was nothing special, but Merle seemed to have accepted his answer. After that he had already averted his attention back to Jason and Darla before walking towards the open field. "Is everyone ready?" He simply asked only to see that both contestants nodded their heads. Only a moment later Merle started the countdown. The moment the spar between Darla and Jason started, huge amounts of mana had been released on both sides. Darla manifested several dozen aqua jets right before she shot them at the same moment, only to manifest one huge spear of compressed mana immediately afterward. She wanted to throw the spear of water at the location Jason would jump to in order to evade the aqua jets. However, what she hadn't expected was that everything in front of her had changed within the moment she had focused on manifesting the compressed water spear. Jason had already been aware of Darla's strength, but he had not expected that her proficiency with the affinity was so high. Within a single moment, she had almost defeated him, if he had not allowed Solaris to enter his mana core before the spar had begun. When his mana eyes had detected the strong mana currents circulating through Darla's body, he could immediately tell that she had wanted to finish the entire battle quickly. As such he changed his tactic as thick black flames sprouted from his back. Only a moment later, the flames stiffened for a second after they had turned into a replica of Artemis wings. The flames were still flickering wildly afterward, but the wings in its entire shape were unmoving, allowing Jason to shoot into the sky before the aqua jets he had been targeted with hit him. Not even a quarter of a second later, Jason enveloped his entire body in Solaris flames before he unleashed the Celestia Aura, his Stigma, the Petrification Curse, his Mana Eyes Abyssal ability and the race-specific Weakening Curse, to the fullest. At the same time, his hands had already reached the holsters of Kumo and Diga which he was wearing consistently. Momentarily stunned by the sheer quantity of curses and abilities weighing her down, Darla could barely perceive Jason's eyes through the black flames. They were cold, and the moment she perceived the black and crimson red guns within his hands, was when she instinctively released the compressed water spear that had yet to be fully constructed. Under normal circumstances she would have required 1, at most 2 more seconds to release her strongest attack in order to show her superiority, only to notice that she had underestimated Jason. The unfinished compressed water spear shot towards Jason, who had shocked Darla by soaring into the air with his entire body being enveloped in flames and wings sprouting out of his back. Meanwhile, Jason summoned 2 compressed black flames with golden strands within, in front of Kumo and Diga's barrel. At the same time the mana stored inside them was slowly being activated and swirling within the mana storage as Jason accessed it. When he saw the incomplete water spear shooting towards him, Jason knew that it was a life-threatening attack, yet instead of wasting any time, he lifted Diga that had the stronger impact. Pulling the trigger, Jason felt that the entire amount of mana that had been stored inside Diga was used up at once, filling the armor-piercing bullet that shot out of the barrel, leaving behind a huge impact on Jason's arm. The impact didn't break his arm, and Jason could only see the compressed flame at the top of the barrel enveloping the armor-piercing bullet before it clashed with the water spear. Nobody expected a miracle to happen, and the affinity advantage was on Darla's side. However, contrary to everyone's predictions, Jason's app bullet pierced through the water spear that could barely slow down its advancement before it continued its advance. Meanwhile, Jason didn't waste any time, as he lifted Kumo to shoot the 6 bullets he had promised to shoot, at Darla, who was shocked beyond measurement. A feint, how? Was everything one could hear before a painful cry could be heard as a total of 7 thump sounds resounded in the eerily silent proximity. Blood splattered and Jason holstered his weapons again as he mumbled in astonishment. The armor-piercing bullets are even better than expected. The amount of mana I've stored was less than half of the mana I can store within my mana core. Chapter 464 Time by Hydesgrain. The impact caused by shooting Diga was enormous, but his arm felt only numb for a few seconds. Meanwhile, Jason was able to figure out that Kumo and the common bullets he used were enough to injure someone with a physique at the mid-lick stage. Darla was his test object, and Jason couldn't help but feel ridiculous that he had been worried about fighting her before. With Kumo and Diga, I should be able to defeat even stronger opponents. However, before he was able to think further ahead, reality struck him. If my opponents are faster, with more powerful affinities, it will be too dangerous and I might as well die before I'm able to unholster them. His mana consumption by shooting Kumo was much lower than he had expected, and by comparing the amount of stored mana that had been used up and what he had utilized before Mike had manufactured his weapons, Jason couldn't help but smile. Shooting entire bullets manifested out of mana and Solaris black flame through his fingers was a lot more difficult and had a higher mana consumption. It was more painful, and the strength accumulated within the Desert Eagles was much higher compared to his fingers. To put it simply, using Kumo and Diga was the perfect means in order to defeat opponents that were stronger than he was. Jason knew that he had to stay vigilant, but in his opinion, fighting against the Ephrata race in an open field wouldn't be as dangerous as it had been within the Yazlon caves. Recalling the incident in which Scorpio died was still painful, and Jason doubted that this would ever change. Nevertheless, the thought of being able to take revenge allowed him to soothe his pain and guilt, replacing it with anger and the desire to kill. After he had defeated Darla, who was writhing in pain as her legs had been shot a total of 5 times, while each arm was pierced by one of Kumo's bullets, Jason retraced his Celestia aura and the stigma's glow before descending to the ground. Everything around him was eerily silent, and nobody dared to move, trying to digest what had happened in the entire fight that had taken less than 5 seconds to be concluded. Is there nobody with a healing ability? I have already extinguished the flames that were about to spread through her entire body and she won't have any permanent injuries, but I don't think that she notices this. Only a moment after Jason had said so, the NUA clan matriarch emerged next to Jason and Darla, who laid on the ground crying in pain. Utilizing her water affinity, the matriarch manifested a ball of water within her hand, which she slowly inserted into the wound Jason's Desert Eagles have caused. Less than half a minute passed before a few bullet shells protruded out of the wounds, followed by the matriarch's water that began to envelop the wounds, sealing them to some extent. After that, she called out for someone, asking for help. Jason had been unable to understand a name, but he saw that a young woman with solidified 2 prismarine crystals stepped forward. She released her mana, and Jason's mana eyes immediately perceived that her mana was unique, with great healing characteristics. As such, he retreated a few steps before leaving the open field as he turned towards Merlath's. That's enough to demonstrate my strength, right? I'll deal with the Ephrata below 1000 drops of liquefied mana, and the others can take care of the stronger Ephrata and the runaways. With that being said, Jason wanted to leave the grand meeting to focus on absorbing more mana. He had to increase his strength as much as possible before he would encounter the Ephrata race. At the same time, it was important to further improve his accuracy with Diga and Kumo. He also wanted to see if there was a way to improve his physique to the extent at which his arm wouldn't go numb while shooting Diga. Otherwise, Jason would have to wait too long before he was able to fire Diga a second time. This was something he had to improve quickly in order to prevent incidents from occurring. As such, Jason didn't plan to slack off. However, Merlarth seemed to have a different idea as he mumbled. So you don't want to discuss your payment for the translations of the neutral body refinement manuals. When Jason heard this, he halted in his tracks only to let out a sigh. Was my hand sign that obvious? Merle just nodded his head without saying anything else as he sized Jason up once again. He might have expected Jason to defeat Darla because his gut feeling told him so, but it was a different matter about how easy he took care of her. It felt as if the number of liquefied drops of mana within her mana core was not higher by 900 but equal or even lower than Jason's. You could say so. But let's not talk about the hand signs but about business. However, before that, is your black flame an origin flame? Jason did not expect Merlarth to ask him this question right off the bat because it was something nobody else had to know. It was simply his private matter. As such, this question had nothing to do with the business they were about to conduct, and Jason decided that he did not have to answer this question. Maybe it is an origin flame, maybe a flame similar to that of the Ephrata race, but it could also be a mutated fire affinity from one of my soul bonds. Just choose the answer you like the most. Merle merely smiled lightly when he heard Jason's answer before he said, "All right. If that's the case, let's talk about business first. Follow me." While most big clan and sect leaders thought that Merlarth wanted to figure out more about the guns and weird fire affinity Jason utilized, Shane and Dahlia knew that there was more than one could see at first glance. The fact that he was the translator of the neutral body refinement manual of the Doom Crawls was not special to Jason's masters. However, it was something completely different than the gut feeling suddenly told them that something huge was about to happen that caused them to feel uncomfortable. Jason seemed to advance and make ties with other big shots even without their help, and both Shane and Dahlia couldn't help but feel that this was great. Initially, they had been sad, but since they had encountered Jaildrake, and they had seen how cold his eyes were, without a single trace of empathy, their mind had changed. Before they wanted to help Jason to grow with them, now, however, both Shane and Dahlia wanted that Jason was able to live and become stronger even if it was without them. They would use their utmost efforts to nurture Jason with everything they had, but not only did Jason advance extremely fast, but their time seemed to be running out too. Will we be able to witness Jason's peak, or will we be the reason for his doom? To Dahlia and Shane, it was clear that Jason's mental state had suffered a lot when he had lost Scorpio. It was only then that they recalled that the disciple was young and inexperienced with death, and how easy a loved one might die. He will overcome it, right? Chapter 465 Signs by Hydesgrain. Jason and Merlarth were able to leave the open field without any issue, and it were only Shane and Dahlia who looked after them with a faint smile on their lips. The other big clan heads had approached the NUA clan matriarch and Darla, who had stopped crying. The skin and flesh have been pierced by the black bullets as if they were made out of butter. Only the bones that seemed to have sustained cracks could barely stop the bullet's advancement. Meanwhile, the bullet that was shot out of the Red Desert Eagle pierced through the thigh. This attack was on par with a mid-lord rank. Everyone was astonished about how powerful Jason's guns were, only for the Blood Sect Patriarch that had approached Darla to say, "It's not only the weapon but the black flame that was able to burn through the compressed water spear's mana. The flame should have a mana burning effect or something similar to that." Nodding their head, the big clan heads understood this too, as one of them said, "Didn't this youth also say that he extinguished the flames and that Darla won't sustain any permanent injuries?" doesn't that mean the flame would have burned its way through Dala until she was to die? Is the black flame capable of sustaining itself through mana? While some big clan and sect leaders began to analyze Jason's guns and how he was able to exhibit such a devastating strength while having less than 30 drops of liquefied mana, others decided to listen carefully. Jason's fire affinity was already interesting, but even more so was the fact that a simple gun was strong enough to kill one of the big clan's prodigies. If every citizen were to possess such guns, what would happen to our rights to reign over them? Wouldn't they start retaliating? They're strong enough to defeat one of the big clan's prodigies without the need for a high mana core rank after all. If Jason were to hear this, he would be enraged, but fortunately, this was not the case. Your worry is groundless. This youth is unique, and it's already a wonder that he was able to handle the impact and mana consumption of those guns with so few drops of mana inside his core. If I'm not wrong, the black flame enveloping the bullets made him so dangerous. Fortunately, he is on our side, and against the Ephrata race he will definitely be the trump we need. It was the Era clan patriarch who said this, and even the Nua clan matriarch who heard this could only faintly nod her head. She was infuriated about her disciple being injured and humiliated, but in the end, it was evident that Jason's strength was much higher than anyone, except Merle Arths, had expected. He will definitely be an important asset against the Ephrata. He might be able to prevent many casualties too. Having accepted the bitter truth, the Nua clan matriarch had said her stance reluctantly, while looking at Dala, who was still in pain. Through the pain she felt, her eyes were quivering lightly as she mumbled, "What a monster." As the Era clan patriarch had said, it was fortunate to have Jason on their side because he would bring forth many benefits. However, what would happen once the Great Argos War was about to end? Would Jason turn into their opponent, or was it possible to lure him to their side? Nobody was sure of that, and for the next few steps that were important for their race's survival, it was not important either. Nevertheless, every head of the big clans and sects decided to remember the youth, with the name Jason Stellar. When everyone dispersed, there were only a few left behind, as someone appeared next to Shane and Dahlia, who were about to leave too. "Shane, Dahlia, please wait a moment." It was the Jiwaya family clan patriarch, who was an acquaintance and on friendly terms with Jason's masters. Astonished about being called out, Shane and Dahlia looked at the Jiwaya family patriarch, who had told them to wait. Was there something they had forgotten? That was not the case, but the Jiwaya family patriarch's next words caused Jason's masters to look at the patriarch in confusion, because he asked a question they had not expected. Is Jason Stellar the same Jason who became friends with Seren in Syro City around 2 years ago? Shane had completely forgotten about Seren and that he was a descendant of the Jiwaya clan, but Dahlia was already answering the Jiwaya family patriarch's question. Yes, Seren and Jason were friends. At least until they went their separate ways. After that, they talked for a few minutes before the Jiwaya family patriarch bid Shane and Dahlia farewell. This was weird. Why does he care so much about the friendship between Seren and Jason? Is he already planning something? Shane wondered quietly. However, Dahlia shook her head as she said, "It's more about figuring out whether Jason will become a threat to his clan after the war ends. It is unlikely for Jason to attack his friend's clan as long as they didn't do anything fundamentally wrong. If I'm not wrong, Jason attracted way too much attention today, and everyone has noticed his existence now. Even if nobody knows about his real identity, his current combat prowess is already frightening enough. Or what would you think if a youth below the age of 17 years can defeat one of the most prodigious children of a big clan? Dala is already in her 40s and has almost reached the Lord rank. For mankind's standards, this is extremely fast. There are only a few exceptions, but they're true monsters." Suddenly, just as Dahlia was about to continue speaking, the ground began to tremble, and everyone sensed that something was huge was about to happen, as an enormous amount of mana had been released at once. The pressure in the surrounding area intensified, and everyone tried to perceive what was going on. However, what nobody knew was that not only the earth around the Argos Alliance's camps was trembling, but that Argos itself was shaking. Far away, inside the barren lands of Canir, a world bridge was forcefully established. It was unknown how long it took before it was completely, but the amount of mana it absorbed was tremendous. Just when the world bridge had been completed, one could see more than 100 beings at the Prisma stage, with a total of 9 solidified prismarine crystals emerged from within. Every being of the mysterious, humanoid race was beautiful. They had pointed ears, were enveloped in a faint gust of wind that brushed past their long hair, and their emerald-colored eyes highlighted their fair pale skin color. Elvas. Spread out and search for Celestia Yaldra's son. If he dies, or even worse, becomes an infernal Celestia, our whole race won't be able to face the consequences. Only a moment later, dense currents of wind enveloped the individuals of Elva race that had just forcefully established a world bridge. All of that had only been possible with the help of Jason's father, who had ordered them to take care of their son. What Yaldra had felt during the last few weeks made him worry. This was also the reason for him to send someone to Argos, because he couldn't go by himself. Celestia Eladra was too powerful to come even close to the planet at the infant phase, let alone pass through the world bridge that couldn't handle his might. Every living being on Argos noticed that something huge had just happened, but the soil below them had stopped trembling as soon as it had begun. Only the mana fluctuations on Canir remained as the last evidence of what had just happened. At that moment, Jason, who was currently inside a small office with Melarths, felt that something great but also devastating was about to occur in the next few hours. The trembling earth and sudden increase of the surroundings' mana density were not worrisome, but Jason's entire being felt as if it was trying to tell him that something good had happened. Yet, at the same time, Jason could tell that this good sign he felt would bring forth something devastating, doom itself. Every action had a reaction, and Jason was fully aware of this. In the end, he didn't care about what kind of good thing had happened and what exactly the reason for the intensified mana in his surroundings was. His heart was thumping heavily, and Jason could barely conduct his business with Melarths, who was distracted by the incident. Why does it feel like I'm missing something? What is going on? Jason thought inwardly, his worry clearly visible. Both felt distracted by their own thoughts, and they wanted to finish everything quickly before they separated their ways without wasting any more time. Why do I feel so suppressed? Is it because of the blood moon today? I doubt so. Let's hope we won't have to face even more problems than we already have. How could anyone know that not only the strongest, highest race had set their feet on Argos, but also that the race that had previously been hiding in the shadows was about to make their first, devastating move? Chapter 466, Blood Eclipse by Hydesgrain. When Jason left Melarth's office, an oppressive feeling began to weigh him down. It was not as if someone utilized mana or their aura to oppress him, but Jason's gut feeling was telling him that something was about to happen, and it was worse than it had been with the Yazlorn caves. This caused Jason to be vigilant about everything. As such, he rushed towards Shane and Dalir as fast as possible. His mana eyes were fully utilized, but he was unable to detect anything odd. Inside the camp, he, his masters, and Emily resided. Nothing bad seemed to have happened. The only thing that had changed was that everyone had left their large, mansion-sized tents to take a look at what happened outside. Nobody knew what was going on, but similar to Jason, everyone could tell that something had changed. When Jason was nearby their tent, his mana eyes perceived that his masters were healthy and full of vigor, which was everything that counted. Emily was also present, but Jason cared more about his masters if he had to be completely honest. The moment he entered the tent, Shane and Dalir looked at him in confusion because his hair was disheveled and a sweat pearl was poured down his temples. What happened, Jason? Is there something wrong with Argos, or did something else occur? Did you already finish talking to Melarths, or did you just return because of the earthquake? Dalir seemed worried about Jason, and he could just sigh in relief when he saw this. They're still fine. Smiling at his masters, he said. Nothing happened. I was just worried that the earthquake might have been a bad sign. I finished my business with Merlarths and he already handed me mana stones in exchange for a few translated neutral body refining manuals. Seeing that his masters were fine was the only important thing for Jason. He didn't even bother that the deal with Merlarths was not as profitable as he had wanted it to be. Shane and Dahlia were not sure what was going on with Jason, but they tried to calm him down. Today we will have a blood moon. This will allow you to absorb mana at a much faster pace. Let's calm down and absorb mana in order to become stronger. The faster you become stronger, the better, am I right? Jason just nodded his head and entered his room in the mansion-sized tent. He didn't want to worry his masters too much. Thus Jason decided that he would absorb as much mana as possible today. I'll liquefy my 24th drop of mana today and absorb more mana during the blood moon. After he made his decision, Jason tried to focus on the task at hand, but it was more difficult than he imagined it to be. His gut feeling told him that something was about to happen, and it took him almost 10 hours before he had liquefied his 24th drop of liquefied mana. Only then did Jason rush to his masters, telling them that they had to be careful before he asked them if it was not better to stay inside the Arior Race's camp. This astonished Shane and Dahlia, and they noticed that something was wrong with Jason. However, instead of accepting his offer, they simply told him that if something were to happen in the Shiabi clan camp, the Arior Race wouldn't be able to help them either. Jason and his masters knew that this was not the entire truth, but instead of forcing them to do something against their will, Jason knew that his masters were old enough to make their own decision. Nevertheless, his heart began to thump wildly and he decided to fly towards the Arior Race's camp to ask Fasro and Midra if they were fine with spending a few days with him and his masters. This might be selfish of him, but that was the least worrisome for Jason right now. The number of camps the Argos Alliance had was large and Jason took more than 5 minutes to cross half the distance. He had barely reached the center where the grand meeting had been held earlier as every single feather on Artemis' wings stiffened. In the beginning, he hadn't noticed anything, and it was only now that he saw the blood moon's light shining on him. Suddenly, Jason smelled an overly familiar fragrance that caused him to widen his eyes. The scent of iron permeated the air. Goosebumps covered Jason's body and he instinctively supplied his eyes with more mana before he seized up everything in his surroundings. At that moment, what he saw caused cold sweat to run down his back. His body was unable to move and Jason was just levitating in the air. Only after a few seconds was he barely able to access his spatial ring. A small stick that looked similar to fireworks appeared in his hand that trembled lightly. Jason was unable to divert his gaze from the terror he witnessed, but he knew that he had to warn everyone about what was happening. Within a few moments, everything had changed and it was as if he was caught in a nightmare, only to exert his strength to slap his cheeks. This allowed him to move again and Jason manifested a fingertip-sized flame to ignite the firework before he threw it into the air using all his might. The last step was unnecessary but Jason knew that he had no time to waste. He didn't even care about the Arior Race's camp anymore and the only thing Jason felt was the need to return to his masters. Please be safe. Jason prayed inwardly, hoping that nothing had happened. What Jason had seen earlier were that several dozen beings of an unknown race infiltrating the tents of the surrounding camps his mana eyes were able to perceive. However, worse was that those unknown beings with a water and ice affinity, Jason assumed to be the unknown Barant's race, were extremely strong. Even the weakest invader he had seen had 5 solidified prismarine crystals. This means that they were stronger than even the strongest human was. Jason knew that the Arior and Lyran race had stronger powerhouses, but he didn't think that the Bahrain race was targeting the foreign races right now. Instead, the leader and other higher authorities of the big clans and sects should be the targets of the unknown Bahrain race. It was unknown whether Shane and Dahlia were included in this section, but knowing that Jaildrake was a cruel man, Jason couldn't help but become worried. Why did I have to leave the tent? Gritting his teeth, Jason couldn't help but think that his timing had been the worst possible. Without caring about anything else, Jason released his entire Celestia aura and stigma at once, enhancing his body and mana circulation by a large margin. At the same time, he circulated a large amount of mana through Artemis wings, accelerating his speed further. His aura spread through the surrounding, attracting the attention of the Bahrain race assassins. Yet, instead of halting in their tracks and pursuing Jason, which he had expected, they started to increase the pace at which they hunted. How can someone that has already awakened a stigma enter this planet? Are the restrictions not working? The leader of the Bahrain race's assassins, who saw Jason, spoke in a small device. Worry could be seen in his eyes, but the reply he received was unpleasing. A stigma. The Elva race emerged from the world bridge that has been forcefully awakened, but none of them should be able to form a natural stigma. Don't try to make up excuses and kill every clan and sect leader you can find. The more the merrier. Just at that moment, the Bahrain race leader heard a voice that was filled with wrath. Don't forget to kill Shane and Dahlia Blair too. They're also on the list. While the screams of dying people filled the surrounding area, Jason became more desperate with every passing second. His gut feeling had been proven correct almost every time, and the same was the case this time as well. Why didn't you two listen to me? Blaming anyone was useless, but he couldn't help himself. Jason's mind was filled with terror, trying to figure out what was going on, while his hope was slowly dimming with the sight below him. His mana eyes made him see everything, and he witnessed how dozens of the most powerful humans were massacred. Each camp Jason flew past with his highest possible speed looked worse than the one before, and the adrenaline rushing through his veins made it impossible for him to hear anything around him. The moment he reached the Shiabi clan camp, his eyes were instinctively drawn to their tent. At that moment, his mana eyes perceived the mana fluctuations of a Barance race assassin with 6 solidified prismarine crystals within. However, even worse was that he perceived how his master's life force was decreasing at a rapid pace. Something had happened, and without being able to think about anything, Jason dived towards his master's tent, not caring about his own safety at all. Unbeknownst to himself, his golden silverish eyes had turned crimson, and there was not even a single trace of white left in his eyeball. Chapter 467 Halo by Hydesgrain. Jason's golden silverish eyes had turned crimson for a quarter of a second before they had reverted back to his initial eye color as he released the stigma that began to glow brightly, to an extent he had never done before. It was painful, but Jason simply ignored the pain. His glowing stigma began to merge with Jason's aura, but he didn't notice anything about that. Artemis wings dissipated, replaced by Solaris replicated wings the moment they had switched out the place within his mana core. Kumo and Diga had already been unholstered, at the same time Jason had charged inside the tent. At that moment, the sight in front of him changed everything. Jason's eyes and Celestia aura had turned from the golden silverish color to utter darkness for a moment as he shouted out, "Shane, Dahlia." What he saw shocked him greatly, and Solaris black flames that had enveloped him tightly erupted, burning down the entire tent. Both Shane and Dahlia's abdomen had been pierced by several icicles whose cold began to spread through their entire body. Jason's mind was blank for a moment before he regained his senses, realizing what was going on. He shot towards the Bahrain race assassin that was about to end his masters, with a terrific high speed he could have only dreamed of a minute ago. Pulling the trigger of both Kumo and Diga, bullets shot out one after another, while Jason ignored the impact and told his arms had to endure. Despite being desperate enough to strain his stigma and fully releasing his Celestia aura, Jason felt that his attacks were still too weak. This was exactly the case, and the Bahrain race's assassin didn't even have to erupt a thick membrane of mana because the bullets were simply deflected as they hit its mana-enveloped skin. When Jason had appeared right next to the assassin, the Desert Eagles had already vanished into Jason's spatial ring as Byakur had appeared in his hand. At that moment, he utilized everything at once: the race-specific weakening curse, the petrification curse, his Mana Eyes abyssal ability, his Stigma's full capabilities, and the intimidating effect of his Celestia aura. Byakur was supplied with a vast majority of his mana, while Solaris Flame was enveloping it tightly. Suddenly driven by desperation and the desire to rescue his masters, every means to attack the assassin to protect his masters merged into one attack. At that moment, the golden glow that had already been present in everything involving Jason was gathering at one place. This caused a chain reaction, leading to the deepest part of Jason's body where he had never been before. It was dark but warm, and Jason felt like he could perceive something he shouldn't have seen yet. There were thousands of locks, sealing something, hiding it from Jason's sight, and there was only one lock that had been opened, revealing a tiny fraction of something he couldn't grasp. Driven by his desperation, and fear to lose his master, his mind stared blankly at one particular lock that released the dense currents of the desire to protect everyone, even if this would mean one had to annihilate an entire race. The lock Jason was looking at was pitch black, and a complete opposite to the vast majority of other locks that were white in color, gleaming lightly in a holy hue. The moment Jason thought the lock, it fell to the ground. He was suctioned out of the deepest part of his body, bringing him back to reality. Suddenly everything seemed to change. Solaris' faint traces of a golden color it had received when it evolved into a Tier 1 origin flame had begun to overwhelm the black of Solaris Flame, devouring everything around it. It was only then when Jason noticed that he had unsealed his Celestia bloodline for a short time, overdriving his body, burning the life force within him only to turn into a crude replica of a divine being, suppressing everything in his surrounding. A gigantic golden silverish halo manifested behind him, brightening up the Argos Alliance's entire camp, attracting the attention of every single Bahrain assassin in the proximity, weighing every foe down. But was that really everything the pitch-black lock had released? The assassin who had ignored Jason turned around in shock, only to see that Jason's entire being seemed to have enlarged several times. The golden silverish halo was spread through by crimson-colored strands, and it was only when Jason lifted Byakur that it was vibrating owing to the sheer power it harbored that the Bahrain race assassin had begun to move. You will be tortured for 3 centuries and killed if you return without fulfilling your mission. This was the only thought that flashed through the Bahrain assassin's mind at that moment. Fleeing might be possible despite Jason's overwhelming appearance, yet, fighting against him was suicidal. Nevertheless, dying while facing invincible opponents might as well be better than being tortured and killed afterward. However, even better would be fleeing after finishing his mission. As such, the Bahrain race's assassin smiled lightly as he unleashed the entire mana of a Prisma stage with 6 small solidified prismarine crystals. Only a moment later several hundred icicles had been conjured in the surrounding area, swirling around intimidatingly. More than 3 dozen were shot towards Shane and Malia, who were already deadly injured, unable to defend against the incoming attacks. Jason sensed this, and he disappeared from the location he stood earlier, only to reappear in front of his masters, manifesting a huge wall made out of golden flames in front of him. The flames were extremely hot and the metal holding together the burned-down tent was slowly melting. Meanwhile, the icicles that had been 1 meter long disintegrated the moment they came in touch with the golden flames. Suddenly Jason's entire body began to crack and he knew that his skin had burst open, while his bones, tendons, muscles, and everything else was about to break apart too. The strength he had lent was too strong for his weak physique to handle, and Jason was fully aware of this. However, he couldn't allow anyone to kill his masters after what had happened with Scorpio. Jason was not even sure how he had been able to unseal the power of a true Celestia for a short amount of time, but he knew that his body was not yet ready. Nevertheless, he couldn't give up now, and instead, he forcefully unleashed his entire enhanced mana absorption rate while every single mana stone within his spatial ring was thrown out by Jason. 3 seconds, give me 3 seconds. he shouted inwardly, hoping that his body would be able to endure everything for the next 3 seconds. Only a moment after the mana stones had left Jason's spatial ring, his mana absorption absorbed them at a rapid pace, and a terrifying suctioning force absorbed everything greedily. Jason's strength skyrocketed, but the thought of his masters that were dying was still present in his mind, tormenting it. They were already heavily injured, and deep within him, Jason could tell that the Bahrain race's ice affinity was something special, something deadly. As such, his wrath towards the assassin increased to an unfathomable extent. At the same time, Jason began to hate himself for being weak, insignificant even after he had given his best to increase his combat prowess within the short amount of time he had been given. It looked like he was about to break his promise to never lose someone he loved again, and Jason didn't want to accept this. He had already been unable to rescue Scorpio, losing his masters would tear him apart. At that thought, Jason's holy halo that had manifested behind his back brightened up even more. Yet, exactly at the same time, his body that was enveloped in a thick golden silverish hue was overwhelmed by a crimson red hue that spread through Jason's entire being. The halo's shape of a holy ring began to change, and if Jason were to see himself, he would think that he was somewhat of a fiendish and holy being right now. It was as if the halo was trapped between the holy and fiendish state, but Jason couldn't care less about that. Once the golden wall of fire had been disintegrated, the Bahrain race's assassin was able to see how much Jason's entire being had changed within a single moment. This caused him to retreat instinctively, only to sense that he was unable to move. One of Jason's eyes had turned crimson red for a short moment, while the paralyzing curse he had utilized showed its true might. Seemingly without moving, Jason appeared in front of the Bahrain race's assassin as he slashed out with Byakhor. The Bahrain race assassin might have 6 small solidified prismarine crystals in his mana core, but the strength Jason had released at this moment was powerful enough to kill every being at the low prisma stage. Chapter 468 Farewell by Hydesgrain. After Jason had sliced apart the Bahrain race's assassin, his entire energy was drained and he coughed out blood. Neither his aura nor his stigma were glowing anymore, and Jason felt weaker than he had ever been. Even when Jason had not started to accumulate mana inside his mana core and was malnourished, he had been more powerful than he was right now. His legs were shaking heavily, but Jason forced himself to stand firmly on the ground. He was unable to see anything clearly because his eyes were blurry, and Jason could barely lift his trembling hand that was drenched with his own blood. Just like that, Artemis emerged from the soul world. Yet, instead of taking care of Jason, she had grasped the assassin's corpse with her talons to throw him around. Meanwhile, Jason ignored what Artemis did as he turned towards his masters that looked at him with a faint smile. Their faces were ashen pale and blood poured out of their wounds. "You've become strong, brat." Shane's voice was weak and Jason could barely hear it as tears poured down his cheeks. Both Shane and Dahlia were dying, and Jason wanted to rush out of the burned tent to bring help when Dahlia used her utmost efforts to say, "Don't go, please. Stay with us, during our last moments." Hearing these words caused Jason to stiffen while he gritted his teeth as his legs gave in. He held his master's hands with his trembling hands, not minding anything that happened around him as he said, "I'm sorry, everything's my fault. All of that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been with Born." Because the Shadow Walker had found him and his unique existence as a halfling, everyone had to suffer. Not only did war break out, but Scorpio died, and now even his masters would die. Guilt about what happened gathered within him, and Jason could barely breathe properly as Dahlia mumbled, "Silly, Jael Drake, would have attacked Sumween. Even without you, nobody is guilty to be born. We have to apologize about Scorpio, if we hadn't." These last words seemed to have consumed Dahlia's last energy, and Jason's mana eyes began to malfunction because there was no mana left within Jason. The last thing he perceived was that the icicles that had pierced through his masters had already frozen most of their organs. Jason wanted to use Solaris flame that had returned to its black color in order to heat up those organs, but when Shane saw this through his blurred and heavy eyes, he said, "Brat, there is no use. Let us go, our time has come." While Shane seemed to have some life left in his eyes, Dahlia's eyes turned dimmer by the second, and the last words she said were, "Shane, I love you. Jason, don't be too sad. You've made us proud." After that, 3 magic circles appeared on the ground around Dahlia as her body stiffened before it went limp. The Dryads had given their utmost efforts to leave Dahlia's soul world the moment she had been injured, but even after Jason had defeated the Bahrain race's assassin, Dahlia prevented them from doing anything. There was only one thing Dahlia could do for her soul bonds before dying, which was releasing them. Even though they hadn't been able to help at the end, Dahlia had loved them dearly, and she would never allow them to die with her. Shane had also released his soul bonds, and Jason, who witnessed everything, couldn't help but grit his teeth as he laid Dahlia's hand above Shane's. Solaris, who had been within Jason's soul world, forced its way out as if appeared in front of the silver origin flame that levitated next to Dahlia. At the sight of the black origin flame, it began to tremble, floating behind the Dryads that were kneeling next to Dahlia. When Jason saw this, he instructed Solaris to stop everything it was about to do before his focus returned to Dahlia, who had just left them, and Shane, who was currently fighting with himself to say something. "Jason, you are strong, but not everyone is like you. Please, if possible, help those who need you. Don't abandon mankind. We love you. Survive by all means." A moment later, Jason could see that Shane's life force had been drained as his body went limp. He was about to cry out and let his emotions free when he sensed dozens of extremely strong mana fluctuations above him. Lifting his face that was smudged by his own blood and tears, Jason saw more than 100 beings with 9 small solidified prismarine crystals in his mana core. Only a moment later, the backlash of having unsealed the Celestia bloodline flooded Jason, and he lost consciousness as he fainted right next to Shane and Dahlia's corpse, while their soul bonds were voicing out their agony. At the same time, Jason's Celestia aura and his stigma that seemed to have disappeared should have reverted back to its flawless golden silverish color. However, this did not happen, and the dark crimson color had spread through Shane's entire being, infesting the Celestia bloodline. Unconscious, Jason was unable to notice anything around him, and he could only tell that his wrath towards certain foreign races and himself was intensifying. Nobody deserves to be treated as the foreign races treated Argos and every living being on it. At the same time, despite his body having entered a state similar to hibernation, his mind was still active, replicating everything that had happened during the last 17 years of his life. Every single second from his birth to up to today. What was the reason for humanity to end like that? Why did everything happen as it did? Who was at fault? Was it Jason for being born as a halfling, or was it something else? Why was his first friend Greg, and his family, whom he thought to be a second family of his, forced into a soul contract by Jael Drake? Why did Scorpio and his masters have to die? Was his weak strength the cause for everything to happen, or something else? Everything had begun with the appearance of the world bridges and the fact that the Shadow Walker had seen Jason, a halfling. Witnessing the past once again, Jason felt as if he was being torn apart by guilt, wrath, agony, and the question about what he should do in the future. Was it better for everyone if he would just disappear, never return, as if he had never existed in the first place, or would this worsen the situation? Other than his mother, he had lost Scorpio and his masters, whom he had loved more than he wanted to acknowledge. His masters had supported him in every decision he made, and this support was unconditional. They never asked him for anything in return, and it was only shortly before Shane died that he asked Jason to not abandon mankind. But, was that even possible? Was there salvation for mankind? Jason was still unconscious and didn't even notice that Fasro had appeared above the burned-down tent. He looked at Jason, who seemed to have escaped death by a hair's breadth. At the same time, he looked at the 100 unmoving Elvers who seemed to be waiting for something. Why is the Evla race here? Do they want to join the war on Argos, or did something else happen? However, even more important for Phasro was the fact that he sensed a divine being's halo within the camp. The enormous aura it had released had weakened every single assassin of the Bahrain race. The aura had come from the place he was currently levitating, but the only thing Phasro could see was a halved Bahrain assassin, Jason, his dead masters, and several soul bonds. At that moment, the silver origin flame that was levitating in front of Solaris had made a decision. It followed the last wish of its master and allowed the black origin flame that released the desire to devour it. Jason didn't notice this, but Phasro's eyes widened at this sight. However, the faint mana fluctuations lingering around Jason were even more shocking as Phasro realized that the young man was the most likely candidate to have released the divine aura. Subconsciously he eyed the Elvas that were still not moving, seemingly waiting for something as one of them said, "This youth, is he Celestia Yaldra's son? But, his aura." The leader of the Elva couldn't help but sigh while staring at Jason, who was unconscious as he said, "I know, his aura shows the first signs of turning into an infernal Celestia." Chapter 469 Why is all of this happening? By Hydesgrain. Jason was not sure how much time had passed, but he woke up in a soft bed. Opening his eyes, one could see traces of dark crimson color mixed within the former golden silverish eyes. He could barely lift his arm that was extremely heavy, and only by feeling his sore body and mana veins that were almost bursting apart did Jason realize that the memories he recalled were not a nightmare but reality. A faint calming fragrance permeated the room, but Jason's expression remained stiff without showing any emotions. Without waiting too long, he got out of the bed, only to notice that his entire body was bandaged and rubbed in some sort of ointment. It was uncomfortable to move, but Jason simply disregarded the soreness and aching within his body. His mind was solely focused on his masters and that they had died in front of his eyes. I was not strong enough, again, he simply thought before he left the room he had rested for an unknown amount of time. Jason did not even realize where he was and the only thing he cared about was to see his master's body. He had yet to bid them farewell, only to notice that his sight blurred. Tears began to pour down his cheeks while his facial expression remained stoic, unmoving as if he was emotionless, only showing his sadness by crying. Others who saw Jason wanted to approach him in order to figure out what he was doing outside his chamber with lethal injuries as he had, only to be held back by other, more sensible people. Not even Yoon, Milan, or Iska, who had seen him, dared to approach him. Since he had lost Scorpio, Jason had already changed. He had distanced himself from them, fearing that he might get too close to them, only to lose even more people would hold dearly. Iska's parents were still alive, and the same applied for Yoon's and Milan's. Though they had been heavily injured, they barely survived thanks to the unknown halo that released a mixture between a golden, silver, and dark crimson color that had weakened the Bahrain race assassins. After that, an unknown race's embassy had appeared and nobody knew what was going on. Yet, the Arior race was extremely respectful to them, thus the new race that had called themselves Elva had to be strong. Apparently, the Elva race was on good terms with the Arior race too. This was everything that counted because they couldn't face another strong race, even less in their current state that had been weakened drastically. The Argos Alliance's morale had hit rock bottom and hope was too far away to grasp. Meanwhile, Jason followed his instincts and what his mana eyes showed him in a detailed manner to walk ahead. In the end, he had reached a small graveyard that was decorated with the big clan's utmost efforts in order to honor those that had been assassinated by the Bahrain race. It looked beautiful despite the conditions the Argos Alliance was currently in, but Jason couldn't help but feel reluctant as he found the last traces of his master's familiar mana fluctuations below the graveyard that had the names written on them. He was still unable to believe that they had died, and it was only when he sensed a hand on his shoulder that Jason looked up. It was Emily, whom Dahlia had taken in as her family and disciple. Jason hadn't thought about Emily for a single second, and it was only now that he saw her ragged appearance. She seemed to have been crying for several days as Jason asked weakly, "How long have I been unconscious?" Emily was not sure how she was feeling right now. She had nobody left except her soulbond after her master had died, while Jason had fallen into a hibernation-like state. Was she angry at Jason? No, it was not his fault. He had almost sacrificed his life, trying to rescue both Shane and Dahlia too. She was just sad about her own weakness and the fact that she had been unable to help her master and Shane during the most crucial time when they would have needed help for the first time. Instead of helping, she had been more like a burden. Shane had barely been able to manifest a spatial portal to teleport Emily outside the tent, as far as possible from the most dangerous area just before the Bahrain Race's assassin had sealed the surrounding space. As such, Emily felt chained by her own guilt. This was not only because of her master and Shane but also because Jason had almost sacrificed his own life in order to save his master's, while she had been unable to do anything. Rather, she had stiffened the moment the blood eclipse, how everyone called the Bahrain Race's assassination, had occurred. Emily had been unable to move or do anything, and the strength she had accumulated to help Jason and her master were rendered useless, insignificant in the face of the foreign race's attack. Thus, she had lived in seclusion for the last month, without meeting anyone, only relying on the lesser Typhoon Rock. Yet, something unexpected had happened to her because of her soulbond. In the end, what had happened to Emily was not important at the moment as she stared into Jason's emotionless and seemingly dead eyes that scared her owing to the color of his eyes that had changed once again. 1 month? You were asleep for 1 month. After she had said so, Emily took out 3 spatial rings that had been inside her pockets during the entire last month. Take them. The spatial rings have all the belongings from Shane, Dahlia, and the assassin from the Bahrain race you've killed. Under normal circumstances, Emily had the right to receive a part of Dahlia's belongings because she was her disciple too. But she didn't even think about taking something as everything should be given to Jason. She didn't even deserve anything because the only thing Emily had done was wasting precious resources and time which Jason could have spent with his masters. 1 month, Jason thought, not caring about anything else Emily had just said. His legs were still shaky and he had yet to recuperate from the internal injuries caused by forcefully unleashing his bloodline. However, instead of thinking about the future, what would happen to Argos and mankind, Jason could only think of the past and what had happened right before the blood eclipse. Jason had focused on becoming stronger every single day, yet it had been worthless because he couldn't save those that had been important to him. There was always something stronger than Jason was, and incident after incident occurred since he had gained his eyesight. Why is all of that happening? Jason mumbled as sadness overcame him. Scorpio was dead, his master now too, who else would die? His mind turned blank and he mindlessly stared at his master's graves in front of him. Meanwhile, Emily pushed the 3 spatial rings into Jason's hand that grasped them subconsciously. Afterward, she remained silent and waited for Jason to finish bidding his last farewell to his masters. It was cruel, but she knew that there were people waiting for Jason. Not only his friends, or Fasro and his siblings from the Arior race, but also the embassy of the Elva race. According to one of the Elva that had learned the human language in 2 days, they had come to this meager planet because of none other than Jason. Chapter 470 Infernal Celestia by Hydesgrain. It was surprising for everyone to hear that the Elva race, which was known for being the strongest highest race, had forcefully opened a world bridge to Argos. The planet was worthless to them, after all. However, it looked like Jason's existence was worth the efforts to do something as painstakingly as creating a world bridge that allowed being at the Prisma stage with 9 small solidified prismarine crystals to step through it. This had astonished many, including Fasro and the other Arior, but there seemed to be something more important which the Elva race's embassy was hiding from them. They didn't bother to explain anything, but Fasro thought that he was able to see a glint of fear and reverence in the Elver's eyes when they spoke about Jason. Do they know more about Jason? Maybe even his real origin? This intrigued Fasro, but he knew that it was unlikely for the Elvers to reveal more information. However, what had been even more astonishing was the fact that the Evler race seemed to be curious about Emily too. Nobody had expected this, yet, contrary to everyone's expectations, Emily's soul bond and not the girl herself was what interested them. According to the translator of the Elver's embassy, all kinds of rocks were seen as sacred beasts by the Elver race. They were not only extremely rare to find, but also said to be on the brink of extinction. It was unknown how there could be a rock with the poorest bloodline on Argos, but their interest in Emily, who was the master of the rock, increased consistently. Their knowledge about rocks was vast, and it was only a matter of time before they tried to lure in Emily, who had the same innate affinities as the Elver race, a wind affinity. Emily had never heard about the Elver race, and neither did she think great of foreign races because they were wreaking havoc on the archipelago and Canir. Yet, the Elver, who had spoken to her in the human tongue, offered an advanced soul contract that prevented it from lying, otherwise, it would die immediately. This made Emily curious about why exactly the Elver race wanted to use such extents, only to lure her in. However, to think that their purpose was solely to take the rock back to their race's origin planet, to groom and nurture it, was something Emily couldn't understand. She was unable to grasp how important her soul bond could be, to a race whose strength was something she was unable to even imagine at that. It was weird, yet the offer she received allowed her to escape from Argos. Her talent was also not bad, and she began to wonder if it was her fate to leave mankind, that had never been good to her, in the first place. Only Jason, Shane, and her master, Dahlia, had helped her unconditionally, but now only Jason was left. As such, she had wanted to stay by Jason's side to support him mentally. Unfortunately, this was easier said than done, and there was no way for Emily to break through the wall Jason had erected around his heart. Nobody would be able to tell what Jason was feeling, except he himself and his soul bonds. Meanwhile, Jason had subconsciously entered his soul world, where he saw that Solaris devoured something. Jason's eyes widened and his anger erupted when he saw that it was the silver origin flame he had forbidden Solaris to eat. Solaris, who had noticed Jason's appearance, quickly transmitted several thoughts towards its master before something worse could happen. The black origin flame had never felt as fearful as by the sight of Jason, and it was glad when his anger dissipated as quickly as it had emerged. The silver origin flame allowed you to devour it. Dahlia's last present. What kind of bullshit is that? Jason couldn't grasp the situation at all, and it was as if his entire being was frozen in place. Since his master had died, his thoughts were chaotic and he had been unable to understand anything around him. There was just emptiness in his mind and a new deep hole in his heart. It was only when Solaris transmitted that devouring the silver origin flame was extremely beneficial, enhancing its purification ability while adding a new, unknown ability, that Jason looked at Solaris again. Solaris inherits the silver origin flame's disguising ability. This was good, but he couldn't help but just nod his head without any vigor as he left the soul world once again. At the same time, he had ignored Artemis, who had approached Jason, trying to console him. She hadn't been close with Shane and Dahlia, but Artemis was fully aware of how important they had been to Jason. Thus, she left the soul world with Jason, emerging in her small form in order to stay by his side, or to be precisely squeezed on his shoulder. While Jason had been mindlessly staring at the graves in front of him, Fasro, Midra and a few members of the embassy had arrived in front of the graveyard. They didn't enter it in order to respect the deceased and remained at the same position they've been standing for more than 2 hours before Jason and Emily left. Emily saw that the Elvers and Arior were waiting for Jason and took a step back, allowing Jason to encounter them first. One of the Evlers stepped forward, introducing himself in the human tongue. "Hello Jason Stella, my name is Lucen Ars. It might sound sudden, but we have been assigned to bring you to someone. If you are fine with it, we will depart as soon as possible." This should have been astonished Jason, but he simply stared at the elver with his eyes that had become a mixture of golden silverish and dark crimson colored. Clearing his throat, Jason answered in the universal language. "I don't need anyone to bring me somewhere. My father asked for me, am I right? If the Elver race does not want to support the human race in defending their planet against the Drake Alliance, it might be better for you to leave this planet. I have something to take care of and I won't leave Argos before everything is finished. Even then, I won't meet my father, simply because I don't feel the need to do so. My current state shouldn't be something my father's race would accept, at least I can feel that it would be like this. With that being said, I'll reject going back." Emily was unable to understand Jason, but she could tell that he said something important because the tension around them increased. Meanwhile, the small group of the Elver embassy was unable to understand what exactly held Jason on Argos. He had the chance to meet his father, a Celestia, who could simply nurture him without any issues after all. They were divine beings after all. At the same time, they could also understand Jason's decision to a certain extent. His current state was extremely bad, considering that the Celestia had told him to take care of Jason, preventing him from becoming an infernal Celestia. As such, they didn't know what exactly they should do right now. "Your state is really not the best, but your father could help you, otherwise you might end up as an infernal Celestia." While Jason began to wonder what an infernal Celestia was, Fasro's eyes widened as he turned towards Jason. "You are a halfling from the Celestia race." Jason didn't expect Fasro to be so loud, but he just nodded his head, not denying anything before he turned back to Lucen. "My current state is not that different from before. There is only the bloodlust and the intent to kill that is forcefully spreading through my Celestia bloodline. However, feeling like this after what had happened should be normal as a human, shouldn't it? Furthermore, I don't think about abandoning my other half, just because my father wants to see me. I won't abandon mankind, that's the least I can do." His expression worsened and his expression changed for the first time, turning sad before he said, "If your embassy wants to return without having achieved your mission, you may return. But I will die during the next months because the majority of big clan heads have been killed. Otherwise, I would appreciate the Elver race embassy's help."